Hello, and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to be talking about gesso and how to gesso a canvas panel. We're going to start here with the materials we're going to use. We have a canvas panel. We're going to try and take the roughness off of this panel. We're going to be using Liquitex Gesso. It has a tendency to drip, so I put a paper towel around it. I have a cheap foam roller that you can buy at almost any store. I have a cheap foam squeegee / brush that you can also buy at almost any store. And then we're going to be using 3 kinds of sandpaper. I have 150 grit, 400 grit, and 800 grit. You might not need to go all the way to 800, but I like to. Now normally I use Frederick's canvas, which is pre-primed and very smooth. But every now and then someone gives you something that you wouldn't buy for yourself. And today, that's what I'm using. Now I start off by taking a small tape strip, flattening it and putting it on the bottom of the canvas. This gives me the ability to have a little bit more control of the canvas while barely touching it from underneath. So, let's get started. I'm going to apply a nice thin coat of gesso, and I'm going to spread it out evenly over the entire surface. You're going to want to do long strokes back and forth as much as you can. This will ensure that it gets into all those little grooves. Now the point of putting gesso on a canvas is to make it smoother and to protect the canvas from whatever it is you're using, be it oils or the water in the acrylics. You don't want that soaking into the canvas. Now here I'm putting on a second coat. You may notice that it's not going on as evenly as the first coat. Unbeknownst to me, the temperature in my studio went up about 27 degrees between the first coat and when I went to put on this coat. So this gesso is now drying extremely fast. So be careful of the temperature and the climate of where you're going to do this. I usually do it outside, and that would have been preferred, but it was a rainy, misty day. Going back in now and just covering up some of the spots that really did not want to get covered. Trying to get it as smooth as I possibly can, but as you can see, it really isn't working all too well. Luckily, I'm going to sand this, and that should make all the difference. So now here I am. I'm coming in with my 150 grit paper. This is going to do the majority of my sanding. Now you really want to be light here. You're not pressing. You're using just the paper to do the sanding. You may have heard, if you've watched him, Bob Ross likes to say with his brushes to use 3 hairs and some air. Well, for sanding, you're going to use 150 grit and some lift. Let there be space in between the sandpaper and the canvas. You just want to lightly knock off all the peaks of the high parts of the canvas. The gesso itself is going to fall into the holes and settle there, but it's also going to coat the top peaks of every knit of the fabric. So what you're doing is you're knocking down the peaks and raising the dimples. Every time you do this, you bring it closer to being a flat surface. Now you don't want it to be perfectly flat. I mean, you can go there if you want, but you want it to be about as smooth as your average wall. Having finished the first round of sanding, I now have a fairly smooth canvas, even though that one coat didn't really go on as well as I wanted it to. So now we're going to take our gesso and we're going to take the foam roller and we're going to do a few very thin coats. But I'm only doing one at a time between my sanding process. Again, you want to get it nice and even as you possibly can. If you have thick spots here and thin spots there, you're going to end up with an uneven canvas, an uneven surface, and sometimes those lines can show through your paint. Now I'm rolling it as smooth as I can, going over spaces I've already gone over before, because you want to make sure it's getting into those little nooks and crannies. Every little dimple has to have some gesso in it. Paying close attention to the edges, for me, is very important. A lot of the times you'll find that the spots that don't quite get the coverage you need are around the edges. I noticed a small low spot, so just filling it in a little, making sure it's good. Gotta get them edges. Now, we'll set this aside, allow it to dry, and then we'll come back in and we'll sand again. So here I am, I got my block. This time I'm using my 400 paper, which should make it very smooth. Your average person is going to go for a 400. For me, 400 is my middle step. I like my canvases to be smooth, especially when I'm working with acrylics. When I'm working with oil, I'll probably leave it a little bit more rough than I would for acrylics. Oils are thick, and you want to give them something to grip onto. Acrylics can be pretty thin, and they don't need as much surface to actually grab. Once again, you're just lightly sanding off all those little peaks and getting it down to a nice smooth finish. Every now and then, you want to run your hand across it to make sure you're getting it smooth. If you feel any high points, knock those high points down. Because I pay extra attention to the edges, you might actually get a little bit of a buildup. So, I take a little extra and knock those down a little bit better than the rest. Wipe off the dust, and you're done. So with that done, we're going to do one more thin coat, again with the roller, and then we'll come back with our 800 grit sandpaper. Now I've also opened the window, so the temperature has gone down, and that is making the coating all that much easier. Again, be aware of the temperature of the room you're in or outside when you're doing this. Gesso, like acrylic paint, is going to dry based on the temperature around you. It'll dry slower in the cold, faster in the warm. Now I'm using Liquitex Gesso. I like it. It suits my purpose. It's easy to use. It comes in these little bottles. That's good for me. You can also buy, full-size paint cans of gesso. I have one of those too, but I tend to use it a little less, or I transfer gesso from there into the small bottle. This bottle's almost empty, so I'll probably be doing that soon. I believe Golden makes a gesso, which is actually just a powder. You add water to it, you mix it up like you would some cake batter, make sure there are no lumps, no air bubbles, and then you just spread it on. Now, since this is a canvas board, I used a sponge and the roller because it's a hard surface. It doesn't bend away from you. If I was using a canvas with a wood frame, I would use a brush, because as that canvas pulls away from you or pushes down, the brush is going to spread and make sure you're getting an even coat. Now for the 800, I am doing as light of a sanding as I can. I'm just very barely roughing the surface, knocking down those peaks and making sure everything is getting flat. So that's it for this video. I hope this helps you in your future painting endeavors, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.